Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. We'll be taking a look at reports that lawyers and journalists could be subjects of surveillance for intelligence gathering, and this is according to the State Security Minister who was at the Constitutional Court this past week. We'll also unpack why the next decade will be crucial for transformation of traditional media. We also have our regular features. Of course, our international editor feature takes us to neighbouring Lesotho, and we'll also be taking a look back in the history feature, and that takes us back to 2007. That's when Oprah Winfrey opened a school for disadvantaged girls in South Africa. Remember, you can engage with us on social media on hashtag SABC Media Monitor. But before we unpack these stories, let's take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. And we start with the Sunday Times, and that's leading with the story of the 13-year-old Parktown Boys High School learner that drowned on a grade 8 school camp. Apparently, he fell off a raft on the Crocodile River, and the school officials only noticed that he was missing 17 hours later. Now that tragedy is made worse by the fact that he wasn't wearing a life jacket at the time. The school had asked parents to buy, and his family just couldn't afford it because both parents are unemployed. The City Press, well, the cover story there is about Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe, who apparently lashed out at board members of the Nuclear Energy Corporation of South Africa, NECSA, threatening them with resistance if they treated him like a small boy. The paper says that Mantashe invoked the words of Jesus Christ to assert his authority before the entire board. I am the way and the truth, as you can see. The Sunday Independent, let's take a look at that. Well, that has President Ramaphosa on its front page, saying that an ANC faction is believed to be using the Eskom crisis and the perceived failure to act against State Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan to build a case for the president's removal. The Sunday Tribune, the same story is the main story there, asking the question, where to now, Mr. President? Well, the paper says that President Ramaphosa was forced to skip the World Economic Forum taking place in Davos, in Switzerland, to deal with the internal rebellion against him in the ANC. The Weekend Argus on Sunday also going with the same lead story, citing sources that claim that President Ramaphosa's detractors are building a case for his removal at the party's National General Council, which is taking place in June. The Sunday World, well, this one has a story of key rivals in a local soap opera, The Queen, seemingly playing out in real life. Yeah, one of the lead actors, Ramichwene, apparently has been killed off the show after she supported actor Vatis Wandaga, who had a fallout with the producers of the popular drama series Igazi, Ferguson Films. And they're the same producers of the drama that Chwene stars in, The Queen. All right, so that's your Sunday newspapers. Very interesting reading. But let's take a look at what's captured your imagination on the social media front. And this is what's trending on social media. And I'm going to tell you, all of it is UFC. And I'm not sure what the fascination with this sport is. It's pretty brutal. But Conor McGregor is the man that's really captured the headlines. He's been out of the sport for about a year and a half. And he came back and he won in 40 seconds. Winning millions of pounds in the process. So Conor McGregor, you'll remember, I think he had a fight with Floyd Mayweather and it didn't work out. And this guy's complaining, you pay $65 for pay-per-view to watch Conor McGregor and it's all over in 40 seconds. So that's at UFC dominating the headlines. There was another story a little bit later down the trends about Harry and Meghan Markle, but you know, for some reason UFC is what's captured your imagination. All right, so that's your big trends on social media, Twitter in particular. So there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors. In Cape Town, we have Wendell Martin, who's the editor of the Weekend Argus. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. That's Wendell there. He's in our Sea Point studio. And here in Johannesburg, I'm joined by Sunday Times political reporter Zingisa Mvumvu. And to him, a very good morning as well. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be chatting to him just now. Okay, so this past week, State Security Minister Ayanda Dlodlo told the Constitutional Court that lawyers and journalists could be the subjects of surveillance for intelligence gathering. According to reports, Dlodlo filed her notice of appeal in the Apex Court in a bid to overturn North Gauteng High Court Judge Roland Sutherland's ruling declaring parts of RICA invalid and inconsistent with the Constitution. Well, for more on this, we're now joined via Skype by Karabo Rajuli, who's an advocacy coordinator at the Amabungane Center for Investigative Journalism. Karabo, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I remember having a chat with you last year about this very same subject, and it looks like the minister just won't let it go. This must be a concern for you.
Yeah, well, good morning, Peter. So I don't think we are concerned at an appeal. It's part of the legal process. But I think it is important to point out that the minister filed her appeal more than 2 months late, more than 2 months after the deadline for when appeal should be filed. And she isn't merely appealing one aspect of the judgment, the one that relates to journalists and lawyers being specific targets of surveillance, but she's appealing the entirety of the judgment, the court's order that bulk surveillance and foreign interception may affect every single member of the South African public being unlawful. So it's quite an extraordinary appeal on every single aspect of the High Court judgment.
So do you have any idea about what she's concerned about and why she's pushing so hard to get this overturned?
So she's filed the condemnation application for the late filing, as well as saying that they're going to appeal the entire judgment. I think the essence of it, and obviously the minister would be better placed to speak to this, but the essence of what the minister says is that the kinds of tech and capabilities that state security currently has are vital for intelligence gathering, and the High Court judgment is a threat to it. Now, it's important to remember that in the Amabungane challenge, we didn't say that we're overturning the entire RICA surveillance architecture. What we were saying, and what we are still saying, is that there need to be adequate safeguards in place to ensure that these very powers, these very technologies aren't used in ways that could abuse members of the public or threaten other fundamental rights, such as the right to freedom of expression, the rights of journalists to communicate confidentially with their sources, which is an intrinsic right in our Constitution. So we're just saying that RICA, the surveillance law, must come into line with the constitutional standard, rather than saying that the entire law itself must be overhauled.
All right, so safeguards might include what? Getting permission from a judge to do surveillance first?
So the current state is that, yes, you do need to get permission from what is called the designated judge to get a warrant in order to intercept communications. What we said, and there's a number of aspects which we looked at, but for the purpose of this conversation, I think three are important. The one is that we said there should be post-notification of surveillance which has occurred. So we have said that this is important because should the state have tapped the communications, monitored emails, and so forth, the person who has been the target of this should be allowed to know after the fact. And this is common practice in many other jurisdictions. So it's not an unusual safeguard. And this just means that if it has been done unlawfully or not on basis, a journalist or a member of the public should be able to appeal that. And that's a normal process of natural justice. We've also said that the process of appointing that very judge, and because the judge occupies such a crucial function of giving a lawful basis under which surveillance must occur, we say that judge's appointment process must be as independent and as impartial as possible. So currently it's a member of the executive who simply makes the appointment. We say that they must be independent. So the High Court agreed with this, with that. this respect. And this is similar to how judges are appointed to become high court judges or for other functions as well. So we're simply saying that with this designated judge, there should be as much independence as possible. And then obviously our last part of our judgment was in relation to bulk surveillance. So these are the kinds of, and then as it relates to journalists, we simply said that it's not that journalists should never be the target of surveillance, but the threshold for getting a warrant to tap the communications of surveillance must be higher because of the risk that surveillance may pose to a journalist's sources or the journalist communications with various sources. So we simply said that the designated judge must take into consideration the fact that the target of surveillance is a journalist or a lawyer or somebody who's got the duty of having confidential communications, and must factor this in, and then must think of if there's another way in which the same kind of investigation can occur without threatening some other fundamental rights.
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud now. I mean, this could also include somebody confessing to a priest on the phone, and this gets intercepted.
Absolutely. When you mentioned the priest, I think that came up just in the debates during the high court hearing in June last year. So what we say, obviously, we pointed specifically to journalists and lawyers who, in law, have got the right to confidential communication. If the law extended to confessions to a priest, then absolutely that should also be included. But currently that only exists for lawyers and journalists.
All right. So the public are watching now, and they're probably saying to themselves, why should I be concerned? I'm not a journalist. I'm not a lawyer. So why should I care?
Well, journalists play a very vital function in society, and that is to provide the public with information, provide the public with information about what government and private actors are doing and not doing correctly. Journalists don't have the adequate protections to be able to do their work, then the public's right to have information is also going to be infringed on, because sources, information won't be able to flow as freely to journalists who ultimately put this in the public domain. So in essence, what we would say is that if journalists aren't able to do their job, then the public is unable to get good quality information from reporters doing their work. But I think it's also important to emphasize that this application wasn't only about journalists. It was about the state's ability to surveil everybody in South Africa. And so this is where the order in relation to bulk surveillance becomes important. So we said, the various constitutional matters which you raised, bulk surveillance, we said in our original application, happens completely outside of the law. And it's not just we who said that. When there was a inquiry in 2008, 2009 called the Matthews Commission inquiry, they similarly made findings that bulk surveillance was happening outside of any legal framework. Now, in South African law, what is said is that any exercise of public power must happen. So the fact that the state has been simply monitoring the communications of everybody in South Africa, and just to explain how bulk surveillance is in very ordinary terms, this means that the state is simply able to monitor the electronic signals, and so that's email communication, phone communication, which happens over the internet indiscriminately. So even if you aren't involved in crime, you aren't doing anything wrong, the state has got the capacity to monitor your communications without any lawful reason for doing so.
But is this not happening in countries like America? Unless we're being misled by movies and things like that. But, with this fight against terrorism, I get a sense that they are monitoring our calls and our communications, and then there's certain words that they flag that they then deep dive into.
Yeah, you are correct. So I think when it relates to bulk surveillance, a comparable example in the United States is the work of the NSA, and this was exposed by whistleblower Edward Snowden. So many people are familiar with the American public being outraged by the fact that their communications were, again, in a similar scenario to in South Africa, being intercepted indiscriminately. Now, I think two points to counter what you've just said about this bulk surveillance occurring, and then perhaps keywords being used to filter information that's being done. In our High Court application, and this is an aspect which you dealt with, we said that as the law stands right now, there isn't any stated procedure on how information which is gathered, intelligence which is gathered is processed, filed, and then ultimately destroyed. And so one of the aspects which we sought to challenge, and the High Court agreed with us, was to say that there needs to be some kind of process around how information is gathered, stored, and who. So we weren't saying that that shouldn't happen, but simply that there should be procedures around that happen. So keywords being identified, so it doesn't just become a sweeping collection and analysis of data. The argument about terrorism being a reason for why the intelligence agencies should is to the communications of members of the public is an important one, because it often comes up that if you take away these capacities, then you're simply disempowering the intelligence and law enforcement authorities to do their work. Again, our application is not about overturning the entire RICA surveillance architecture, but about ensuring that it's not abused. And this is important for the work of the intelligence agencies, because what we have seen in South Africa, and this came through in the high-level panel report on state security, is that the very functions of state security were being politicized and abused. And so, in other words, the work of intelligence agencies was being reduced because it was being used for other things. So we're saying that if there are adequate safeguards in place, then it should ensure that the direction and focus of the intelligence agencies is on the right things, such as legitimate threats rather than being used against journalists or for political reasons in fighting within political parties.
All right, Karabo, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for explaining to us how important this issue is, and we'll continue following that story. Thanks so much indeed for your time. All right, that was Karabo Rajuli, who's Advocacy Coordinator at the Amabungane Center for Investigative Journalism. All right, let me get a take from our guest editor here in Johannesburg about this whole issue, and also we might get a word from Cape Town as well. Zingi, so it's quite scary that your calls, particularly as a political reporter, might be monitored, and this is something that must scare us as journalists.
Absolutely, Peter. It can't. I mean, I couldn't have explained it better than how Karabo did. I mean, the work that we do and the kind of people that we do and the kind of information that we get exposed to, which is very much important to the public but may be damaging to certain individuals within levels of power in different sectors of society. Now imagine if, as you know, almost on a weekly basis we engage with sources on a confidentiality basis, you know. So if I'm monitored and the information that I get and I expose stuff like graft, corruption or planned crimes and stuff like that, it gets to be known by the state or the state security, which may have friends of those people that ought to be exposed, then it doesn't only infringe the right to publishing information, but it also puts the lives of those involved in danger, being the sources and the journalists themselves.
All right, let's try and get a take from Wendell, who's in Cape Town. He's our other guest editor. Wendell, as the editor of the Weekend Argus on a Sunday, it is also a concern for you, I guess. If you are being monitored, it will make your job almost impossible.
I think this is something that some journalists are aware that they might be working with, this danger of surveillance. And in the previous ruling in the High Court, the judge was sort of trying to create a situation where at least 90 days, within 90 days, if you are being surveilled, you're going to be told this. And with that being taken away, people have less time to be able to deal with their sources. Looking at many of our stories over the last couple of weeks and in newspapers in general, we do often deal with people that need to have their privacy protected so that when we do run things, we are able to not put them in a position where they may lose their work, and that they continue to trust the journalists and editors that they work with.
And I would imagine also, the minister, whoever occupies that position, that's a political appointment. And a lot of the people doing the surveilling perhaps have political leaning. So it becomes dangerous, doesn't it, that we've got political people supposedly apolitical in their work, but they're kind of always influenced, aren't they?
Yes, and we've had cases of ministers before telling us that their phones have been intercepted and asking about how videos have leaked, and sometimes we're not completely aware of the power of surveillance that goes into the monitoring of people in politics.
All right, and final word from you, Zingi, about the idea that, we've got political appointees monitoring people like you who deal with political stories.
It's simply upset, Peter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the least I can do. As I said, we deal with very sensitive information, and at times, people, when they give us information, they are at risk of losing their jobs, they are at risk of being victimized, they are at risk of being killed. Now, imagine that information just being available willy-nilly to people within the state security who are politically influenced more often than not.
But there are, if we're to believe state capture, that there are some journalists who've been taking brown envelopes and working with some of these politicians, and so that maybe they need to be surveilled.
Of course, I mean, in cases where there is, enough motivation as to why a particular journalist must be surveilled, I think that should be granted. But as Garabo was saying, that it ought to be, special circumstances. They can't just be willy-nilly whereby the process is even open up for abuse, where politicians or those that are close to them want to get to know certain information and how it got to journalists. So there ought to be a very rigorous and quite serious process to determine whether one should be surveilled or not.
All right, okay. We'll leave that for the time being. We're going to take a quick break. And then after the break, we'll start taking a look at journalism in the digital era. And the word transformation comes up. And I know what you're thinking transformation means, but find out after the break what I mean when I say transformation.
I always fly.
On Network, we lead Africa's tech conversation.
There's more disadvantages to controlling social media than there is good.
Social media is used as a powerful tool to get the message across.
We have the Internet of Things, wearable devices, and 5G technology.
We've started a rent renewal program, where in essence is raiding the infrastructure for 5G.
I wanted to get a drone license because I've always loved aviation.
Join me, Phumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 8:30 p.m. right here on Network with your technology and social media news.
Our job as the SA Today team doesn't simply start when the cameras start to roll. We also work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep you up to date with stories of the day.
What have you established as an organization, or rather as an association, regarding this WhatsApp group Stokvel?
If you look at the WhatsApp Stokvels, people join irrespective of whether they know each other or not. So the person joining is faceless. The one recruiting is also faceless. It's a disaster.
Watch SA Today every day from 3 p.m.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, in this digital era, the internet represents a big part of our lives, and in the past decades, digital transformation and adoption have been at the forefront of every sector and industry. Indeed, new technologies have made digitalization essential in order to sustain their business models and prosper. However, some industries have been heavily hit by the digital transformation. Most apparent, the print media. Now, according to reports, the next decade will be critical for traditional media to digitally transform. To help us unpack this, we're now joined by freelance journalist Riranzu Shingwenyana, who's someone who's been watching this space quite a lot. Thanks so much for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, so we've had chats about digital and how it's kind of taking up the space that print used to own. Take us through your thoughts about this need and how urgent is it actually?
I think there's no better time than now to adopt digital transformation. When you look at the past 10 years or 5 years we have seen digital taking over print. People these days, they consume news on their phones, which is mostly predominantly on digital. Therefore, it means the next coming 10 years, it's sort of a second phase of transformation, meaning that another platform that is going to change, it's radio, which I think is going to be under pressure to adopt new platforms such as podcast. Like with print media, as I said, print media had to move from hard copy to now digitalized. So with radio as well, they will have to sort of find a way to augment whatever that they are distributing in terms of content. Because, you know, sometimes I don't have to sit down and listen to the radio. I miss a show in the morning, so I must have an option to download whatever that I've missed in the morning. So I'm thinking the next 10 years is going to be critical for radio.
Do you think it'll take as long as 10 years? Because things are moving so much quicker now, and this speaks to the urgency of the switch.
That's why I said we are living in a very interesting time. You know, it might happen 2 years to come, or 5 years, or 10 years. It depends on the willingness to adopt. Because, you know, with digital, certain media houses were not like really open to adopting, because they were saying, okay, not everyone has a cell phone. But we know the internet is there, everyone owns a cell phone. So also as well with radio, people don't really, they do have their radio on their cell phones. But it's hard to listen to a radio.
All right, we'll talk about the radio just now. Let's finish up with the print, and I'm curious about the take-up of, because I find it hard to read long stories on screens. So the nature of the journalism is likely to change as well, because the space on the screen that you have, some are just watched on phones now, not even on their screens. Is that part of the transformation, where you have to tell your stories shorter, quicker, and using less words?
I think as things move, people start to like have a short span, you know. So therefore, it means also the size of the story. It needs also to adopt that. You have to be succinct to the point, not writing a long story, because people lose concentration. So with digital, because sometimes you watch it on your phone, which is a small screen, you need to be like straight to the point as a journalist. When you write a story, make it straight to the point.
All right, but data is the big kind of barrier. So it's all very well to have a phone, but if you don't have data, you can't get online. So are we saying that until data becomes cheap, that papers will still have a place?
I believe yes. It will continue and have digital. I mean, print will still have a space, though we know that data is expensive. Though there's also discussions of reducing the price of data. Hopefully, it will be reduced by then, or by the next coming 2-3 years. So it means then more people will start using data. Yes, I mean, start using online digital.
So does that mean that in the future, publications will be online, or is it that publications will have an online wing of their publications?
I think newspaper will be online, because we know that, especially the dailies, they have like drastic decrease in the number of circulations, meaning that people are no longer exactly buying. The only newspapers that are still big is the Sunday newspapers. Yes, because most of the people who read Sunday newspapers are, let me say old people, but like young people.
That's me, oh my gosh.
You know, like young people, they always want to consume, because I want to wake up in the morning and then just open my phone and read. It means then all the newspaper will have to be online. We'll see less of print on shops.
All right, let's talk about the transformation you're talking about on radio now, because traditionally a lot of people, if they're around the house, they'll have the radio on in the background, but a lot of the shows that are considered prime time are the ones that we're driving to work and driving home. So your drive time in the morning, drive time in the evening. Are you saying that with the whole podcast notion that might shift?
that will shift in a manner that sometimes you don't want to listen to the radio, though you want to consume news. Then in the morning, what I do in the morning when I wake up in the morning, I will listen to a podcast, even though I want to. I will wake up and watch TV, and then on my way to work, I will listen to a podcast to motivate me. Then, because I've missed something, or during the day, then on Twitter or whatever, I saw that was a big story that was broadcast in the morning, then I have to go back. Right. Radios will have to have a platform where I have to go back and listen to whatever that I missed in the morning.
So the idea of these transistor radios that we've had for years and years, are they going to disappear?
I think they'll still be there in the museums. But I think what is going to happen is that we just have to accept that we are transforming in a way. We're moving with times. Therefore, there will be those will still remain as like with print. But I think almost every element of radio will sort of disappear as the decade continues.
All right. So we're talking about mostly distribution at the moment. I'm just wondering, will that have an effect on the content production? We talked about it just now with print, where words become less and formats are designed for a certain type of screens. Is there going to be a shift in the type of listening? In other words, do those podcasts have to be a certain duration because of data and so on and so forth?
Yes, I think the duration also will decrease, because you can't be listening to a podcast for an hour. I usually listen to podcasts which are 45 minutes, 30 minutes, which it's fine. Though it means then with radio also, they will have to reduce their. It's no longer going to be a 6 to 9, then it will be of a 7 to 8. You know, so that you have more content, and for someone who is going to listen, then they will have to listen for a shorter space of time.
All right. So how does social media fit into all of this? Because they say that they're not the media, but we're seeing more and more media content being uploaded and used on these platforms. So we now no longer know whether we're just on a social media platform or we're actually getting caught up in another media platform.
I think it's high time for social platforms, that's what they call themselves, to just accept that they are a medium, a social media. Because but when you look at, let's say 10 years back or 11 years back, when Facebook started, it was just for community engagement, like people communicated. But today, the first thing when you open Facebook, it's news that you see. So it means also then there will be a mechanism that include all these things to form one, for a consumer to have all these types of platform to consume one content.
All right. Perhaps as a final question, take me forward 10 years. I wake up, how is my day going to look, and how do I consume the media around me?
Okay, when you wake up in the morning, I know the first thing that I do, I don't know you too, what you do, Peter, it's to look at my phone. First thing that I will want to see, it's news, so that I know when I go out what is going to happen. I know that, okay, on radio, instead of listening to radio, I'll get a notification which comes from a podcast telling me that at 8 o'clock there's going to be this show, which is going to live. Because with podcast, I'm also going to live broadcasting. Therefore, you move into to print, it's also going to receive notification to say this is the big story on the newspapers.
All right. And then during the day, I'm driving to work. What do I do?
During the day,
am I listening to my car radio, or am I listening to a phone on Bluetooth?
You have to listen to your phone on Bluetooth, because you will have your podcast on your cell phone. Then you connect to your to your car radio.
Wow. Yeah. And then television. I get home at night. Am I watching it on TV or on another screen?
It depends, because you're always on your phone, to be honest, Peter. That's the truth. You're always on your phone. Because what I do when I arrive in my house or my room, I'll open my laptop, because I'll continue working. Then, instead of watching the TV, I'll have my work on the laptop and then a short screen on my laptop while I'm listening or watching news. So that's what's going to happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, these are interesting times that we're living in,
Yeah,
and
like
they'll
I
get
said.
even more interesting as time goes by.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raranzu, for giving us your insights on what the future might look like and how we're going to need to respond as the media to some of these issues. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, so, okay, you're still watching Media Monitor. Stay with us. We have so much more still to come.
The Sahara, Arabic for the Great Desert, is the world's largest hot desert and one of the harshest environments on the planet. It is the third largest desert overall after Antarctica and the Arctic, which are cold deserts. At 9.4 million square kilometers, the Sahara engulfs most of North Africa. The desert covers large sections of 10 African countries. The Sahara is bordered by the Atlantic on the western edge, the Atlas and the Mediterranean Sea to the north, the Red Sea on the east and the Sudan and the valley of the Niger River on the south. The Sahara's northeasterly winds can reach hurricane level and often give rise to sandstorms and dust devils. The Nile River crosses the desert from its origin in Central Africa to empty into the Mediterranean.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit to a story that we've just covered now about transformation in the media. And I want to get a sense from our journalists, actually. And let's start in Cape Town with Wendell, who's the editor of the Weekend Argus on Sunday. Wendell, how much has digitization changed your business already?
Sure, I think newspapers have really changed a lot, or have had to adapt and change over a lot over the last 30 or 20 years. I mean, with the introduction of television being one of the big knocks to evening newspapers, people's attention spans are changing in the afternoon, and I think we're down to pretty much 2 evening editions in the whole country, whereas people go home and watch television instead of using the newspaper. But I have found that there is an element of securing tangibility in the newspapers that keep people on print. This comes in the form of things like oddly puzzles, which kind of brings people to a situation where they have to put a pencil on a page if they want to engage it in that way. And newspapers have had to change their size. You know, we've seen newspapers go from broadsheet to trying compact sizes over the years. And in terms of content, I think we've had to move more towards analysis and finding different ways of keeping people engaged in an edition of a newspaper that doesn't change as rapidly as an internet website does.
All right, so tell me, it used to be that the lead story in the physical paper was then put online. Is that still the case, or do you have an online story that then gets further developed in print?
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to the concept of shovelware. When newspapers first had to introduce websites, it was the case of, after a few hours, you take what was ever in the newspaper and put it online. But we've had to make content online richer and get into the space of breaking news. So if something happens during the day, such as a famous musician dying during the middle of the day, you can't wait till the end of the day to have that only go out in newspaper. You have to have a digital presence and to be perhaps live tweeting from a funeral home. because the audience is no longer just waiting for your newspaper, they're following you on Twitter and in different spaces.
All right, and Zingi, you're reporting now. It used to be you had all week to kind of put your story together, get your thoughts. Your deadline might have been Friday, Saturday, whatever, and then it came out on the Sunday. How has your job changed as a result of this digitization process, even though you know that your predominant work must be in the Sunday paper?
Yes. Well, definitely it has changed, Peter, because as my brother was saying in Cape Town, that today people are no longer just waiting for Sunday. They need to be kept up to speed with what is happening during the week, which is why, for instance, at Sunday Times, we have a platform like Times Live, which is our daily sort of publication that we feed with everyday news. But I also think that the whole influence of the digital age into journalism as a whole, at times is quite exaggerated in terms of that this is the end of journalism, this is the end of newspapers. I think there is still space. It's just the matter of the platform in which this information will be consumed. It will, of course, move to the digital space, but there is space for journalism. Journalism is quite unique to, for instance, Twitter, Facebook. I think journalism will remain as long as we understand that ours is to generate content, even if this content ends up being discussed on social media. But social media conversation should be driven by the content that is developed by newspapers. I see that some among us have lost focus in terms of the media houses, in that they take the content that is on social media and put it on their mainstream media platforms. And I think that is where we are going wrong, and that is what could lead to our death. But as long as we are the one who set the agenda, who determine what is going to be discussed on Twitter, on Facebook, on WhatsApp, and all these other social media. Are you not in denial
here? I mean, let's take your paper, for example. Years ago, when I was much younger, you had to rush out to go and get your paper because it was going to run out. And your circulation of your Sunday Times has dropped significantly over time because people just don't go and buy newspapers. There's a generation who, if you ask them, they can't tell you when they ever bought one. Yeah. So print, for sure, is being consumed less and less. Surely what that means is that at some point it will disappear.
Well, it won't. It will disappear in the physical form. Yeah. But even now, for instance, you may say what you're saying about the Sunday Times, but have you checked the numbers, for instance, in terms of how many people have subscribed in terms of the copy that they get on the digital, So you would find as the physical copy numbers are dwindling, the subscription numbers are going up because Sunday Times, for instance, continues to offer unique and compelling content. And no one
you had to get that in. All right, Wendell, let's come back to you about this issue. 10 years from now, and you're the editor-in-chief of the Weekend Argus on Saturday and Sunday. What's going to be different about how you approach your work given the changes in the technology that would have taken place?
Peter, just to clarify, I'm the news editor of the Weekend Argus Sunday. I think we have started to see workflow changes in terms of our product. Like my colleague Zingiso was saying, most newspapers also offer an e-edition or a replica edition online. And this is the kind of thing which people would use on their tablets, and as opposed to going out and buying the newspaper. And for some people, there is this need that is drawn towards the design and the beauty of what goes into creating a newspaper. There may also be a continual draw towards people that just read web pages. And I think as media houses, we need to look at revenue and what happens with advertising and how we continue to fund the journalism as we perhaps migrate from focusing on creating pages towards creating web content.
All right, okay. I'm going to leave it there for the time being, but I'm sure we're going to have lots of conversations about these and other things. In a short while, I'm going to be asking both of you to take us through our newspapers. But first, one of our regular features on the program is hearing from our journalists across the continent. And today we're going to be going to Lesotho, where Rapelang Khadebe, SABC correspondent, is going to join us to tell us what the newspapers are saying saying. But before that, we are going to actually go back in history, and we go back to 2007, and that's a time when Oprah Winfrey came to South Africa to fulfill a promise to Nelson Mandela, and that was to set up a private school, particularly aimed at children who were underprivileged but talented. This is how the SABC covered that story back then.
The who's who in the business and entertainment world were in Meyerton today for the opening of the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls. The project, which was started in 2000, will see 152 girls from impoverished backgrounds attend the world-class education facility. The girls all excel academically and fought the odds to stay in school. Madiba also attended, adding a bit of magic to the occasion.
A red carpet A-list affair comparable to anywhere in the world. But stars like Chris Tucker, Tina Turner and R&B artist Mary J. Blige weren't the center of attraction today. These girls stole the show. Many of them orphaned and dealing with social issues beyond their years. The Queen of Talk is giving them a lasting chance at education. A chance to learn at a first-class institution without finance being a barrier.
I know that when you educate a girl, you begin to change the face of a nation, because girls become women and they educate their girls and their boys and their children. Girls who are educated are less likely to get diseases like HIV and AIDS. And because AIDS is a pandemic in this country, I believe that we have to begin to change the pandemic by education.
And she's getting the perfect endorsement. Madiba initiated the idea of the school and flew in from his holiday in Maputo to be part of the festivities.
We shared our conviction with Oprah that the gains of our democracy would be nullified if we did not properly educate our children and youth. She obviously recognized the potential in our youth.
More than 3,000 applications were considered. These girls will integrate 7 and 8 this year. The school's curriculum will be in line with the rest of the country, but will have a strong focus on life skills and leadership, a quality already evident in many of these children.
Looking forward about studying about president, being a president, how to act as a president, how to look as a president, and really affects a lot of facts about being a president. So I want to be a president when I grow up.
When I grow up, I want to be a doctor and open my own hospital.
Winfrey says because of the reality of the AIDS pandemic in the country, parents will be asked to give permission to do AIDS testing among the pupils. A new chapter begins for the girls entering these gates today, one that has already changed the course of their lives. And there are expectations that the country's future leaders will emerge from these classrooms. Faith Daniels, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so it's 2007. It'll be interesting to see where these young women are now. It is 13, 14 years later. Perhaps that's an exercise we'll do for you. All right, as I said just before that, our international editor, this feature is where we go to a country across the continent and get a sense of what's happening on the front pages of newspapers there. And today we go to Lesotho, where we'll find our SABC reporter, Rapelang Khadebe. Rapelang, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program. Can you hear me? There we go, there he is. All right, so Lesotho, tiny country, but manages to generate a lot of news. I'm sure the Sunday papers are busy this weekend.
Hi, Peter. I think it's something to do with our altitude, 1,000 meters above sea level. I think attracts a lot of attention, eh?
All right, take us through the papers. I'm sure Tom Tabane is on the front pages of most of them.
He has been the celebrity of the week, I must say. I think we'll go through 4 of them. We have 4 weekly newspapers. We don't have just weekend newspapers only. So I think Public Eye, the first, which says Tabane dampens retirement euphoria. Then we'll take you through the Post, Tabane to step down. Then we'll take you to Lesotho Times, that says news tightens on Tabane. And finally, the Metro that says, I think, resurrection. It's a story about some, I think, pyramid scheme that suddenly came back to power.
All right, let's start with the Tabane stories because they're all kind of carrying the same story. What is the story that's being told inside Lesotho about what's happening with the Prime Minister?
It is quite an interesting one, yes. Quite an interesting one because they published their weekly, but they now did the Sunday version, of which I like the interesting approach to what they did because they say he dumps retirement. One has a feeling that this whole exercise about him retiring could have been a diversion such that we don't really focus on the death or the investigations that are going on. Because one would really say he said nothing. He remains the Prime Minister. He just showed us that he intends to retire. So the entire expectations and the noise around going to announce his retirement, he's going to step down, ultimately finding that he's just announcing his intention to retire. But something good did come out of it because we saw the two warring factions from his political parties for the first time sharing a photo pic moment. Mm-hmm. If you read the expressions, you could say it is still not convincing yet. So I suppose the next few months is going to be quite challenging for all of them to really show that the solidarity they're talking about and the unity can actually be translated into actions.
I know the Prime Minister apologized to the King about the effects that this infighting has had. How have citizens been affected by the goings-on within the ruling party?
Oh, yes. Look, if you consider the number of how much attention and how much popularity his party has as ABC, big expectations with promises to do sweeping changes, service delivery champions, high expectations indeed. And all they have fighting about amongst themselves. I think he found it worthy that he can actually start with His Majesty and apologize and to the entire nation. Whether he's just being a politician playing to our hearts and minds, that remains to be seen.
All right. So Rapelang, thanks so much. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much, my brother. All right, that's our reporter in Lesotho, Rapelang Khadebe. Let's come back home to South Africa. Front pages of our papers here and the Weekend Argus on Sunday. Let's find out from Wendell why they went with that story of President Ramaphosa. Wendell, tell us about your story.
Independent media group around factions in the ANC trying to call for the end of Cyril's career through various processes coming up in the ANC over the next bit. And it all comes down to the management of SOEs and people not being happy with the president having Pravin Gordhan as a minister and managing these SOEs. And we can see that across other stories as well, such as with the City Press. We see a story there where we have a schism between a minister and an SOE. Mm-hmm. And this is a narrative that I think has been going in our country for much of our democratic era.
All right, and coming back to Sunday Times, I mean, this shocking story of a 13-year-old boy, I mean, there's so many questions that just need to beg an answer. How does a boy fall off a boat and nobody knows anything for 17 hours?
Yeah, well, I think that story, Peter, brings into question the type of separation of responsibilities between parents and the schools with which we send our children. Do these schools have the whole responsibility over the child during their time at school or during their time at school events, being a tour or whatever it is, but that is organized by a school? And I do think that in this regard, it does appear that there was some kind of negligence, as you were saying earlier on in your intro. 17 hours later only did they realize that the boy was missing, and I think that ought not to have happened in this particular manner. So the schools ought to be quite more, responsible and ensure the security and safety of the children, because when we send our children to the schools, we expect them to come back as they were. And in this regard, unfortunately, it was another story.
There's so much more to this, because there were 5 kids on the raft. Surely the other 4 should have noticed this kid has gone missing. I think this week a lot will be revealed, but we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we always run out of time. So, Singi, thanks so much for joining us here in Johannesburg, and Wendell in Cape Town. Thanks so much indeed for your thoughts and your insights as well. Really appreciate that. Okay, and for you at home, thank you very much for watching Media Monitor this week. Join us again next week at the same time. We'll have much more for you. Stay with us for the rest of the day on the SABC News Channel. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.